Welcome to Spotlight. It's day 23 of the Russian conflict in Ukraine as heavy fighting continues near the capital, Kiev. Mariupol and several other cities in the east and south remain under siege as well. At a rally in the Russian capital, President Vladimir Putin defended the Russian operation in Ukraine, saying that Moscow had no choice but to enter the country as the U.S. was using it to threaten Russia. Moscow also says it's close to fulfilling one of its demands, which is to keep Ukraine neutral. The U.S., on the other hand, is now concerned that China will help Russia circumvent economic sanctions imposed by Western nations. Washington says Beijing will bear responsibility if it supports Russia's military action in Ukraine. Let's take a look at the guests that we have for tonight's Spotlight. Radio host, journalist, and political activist Don DeBar is joining us from New York. And the Balkan Forum Executive Director, Astrit Istrefi, is joining us from Pristina. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Don DeBar in New York. The U.S. Right now is concerned that China could help Russia circumvent economic sanctions imposed by Western nations. Washington also says that Beijing will bear responsibility if it supports Russia's military action in Ukraine. Talk to us about Washington's concerns and whether they are warranted or not.
Well, first, on the face, China said that they see American sanctions as illegal, and China said we are not bound by anyone's illegal sanctions. That's what they're saying now. If you go back to 2014, when the U.S., the Obama administration, decided it was going to try to sanction Russia into submission after the Crimea referendum, the first thing that China did was sign the largest business deal in the history of the world with Russia, more or less guaranteeing them some pretty steady business for 40 or 50 years thereafter. I don't think that the United States has the wherewithal to go full throttle battle with China. If the United States and China were to divorce right now in terms of their economies, the United States would take back all its money and stock certificates, and China would keep the factories and the workers. That is not exactly a prescription for victory on Washington's side. And finally, the policy that's being made, by the person at the top is literally, as the spokesperson for President Putin pointed out in response to some pretty crazy remarks that Biden made, he's suffering from classic symptoms that it wasn't pointed out in such detail or quite as coldly as this, but of dementia. The DSM-5, memory loss, difficulty communicating or finding words, difficulty with visual and spatial abilities, like tripping and falling down several times as you climb into a plane, difficulty reasoning or problem solving, a very germane problem at the moment, as well as difficulty handling complex tasks, difficulty with coordination and motor functions, again, tripping and falling multiple times, and confusion and disorientation, as in U.S. policy at the moment, for example, Afghanistan. We're not working with John F. Kennedy at the pinnacle of the U.S. government at this moment of crisis where we're very close to a war with Russia. And for the United States to decide that this is the time to take on China shows that perhaps there's another page in the DSM-5 that needs to be looked at, something closer to a psychosis.
Mr. Istrefi, the U.S., it's been cranking up its threatening rhetoric over China's military and economic cooperation with Russia. We've been discussing that with Mr. DeBar right now. In the past, we know that the Chinese President Xi Jinping said that he respects Russia's actions regarding Ukraine. Beijing would support Moscow at the UN. Many observers are saying that we're witnessing the end of a unipolar world as we know it. Do you see it in that light as well?
Well, obviously, the world is not as it used to be before the Russian aggression in Ukraine. And that's clear. I think this is a defining moment for the world. And I really don't think it's about Russia and United States. It's about, or China and United States. It's about Russia and the entire world. I mean, just the voting itself in the United Nations General Assembly tells it that it's majority of the countries in the world condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine. And even China has abstained, which gives an indication that, at least in the General Assembly, they are not aligning clearly with Russia. So I think this is a question of, how far Russia will go and what are the other actions that will be taken not only by United States, but by most of the countries in the world who are concerned and sees as a threat to peace, to freedom and democracy.
Mr. DeBar, I saw you shaking your head there. If you'd like to add anything to what Mr. Istrefi is saying right now.
Yeah, plenty. First of all, it's U.S. and NATO forces that are gathered around the borders of Russia, and included in that, they're placed in three former Soviet republics, and if you count what's in Ukraine and what's been toyed with in Georgia, and if you look at the former member states of the Warsaw Pact, all of these were supposed to be off limits when Russia, as the only of the four powers that occupied Germany after World War II, agreed to leave and give Germany that much sovereignty. I note the United States military still occupies Germany in that context. The agreement was founded on a promise that has been, memorialized in about 8 different venues now from people on the U.S. side of it in the media, that they would not move their forces any closer to Russia than they were at the time that Germany was reunited, the Elbe River. Now, instead, you have an assembly of forces, military drills and exercises ongoing from practically the beginning of the Obama administration, with some respite during the Trump administration, under a cloud of accusations that the president of the United States was a stooge of Putin for doing that. And then open talk in Ukraine while people are marching under Hitler's flag, goose-stepping at torchlit ceremonies at night, talking about killing Russians, about let's get our nuclear weapons back. I'm amazed, first of all, that for 8 years, while Russians were being bombed repeatedly, incessantly, while 14,000 Ukrainians, 2/3 of whom were killed in the eastern part of the country, were murdered by the government in Kiev, installed by the United States, with the people of Russia and the people of Donbass begging the Russian government to intervene, that it took 8 years. But the pressure finally reached a point when the Duma, when the parliament had to act because the demand was so great among the people of Russia. I speak to people in Russia on a regular basis, and I have for the entire duration of this, and all they would do is say, we can't believe this government isn't doing anything. If a kid gets arrested in Turkey or something, the Marines are ready to land and remove them from jail. Ask the Israelis what they would do if one of their pilots ended up in a Syrian jail. Russia sat there with the assembled NATO forces across its western border and the U.S. Navy in Okinawa and elsewhere on its eastern border for 8 years, watching Russians get slaughtered with a promise of exterminating them, and they finally acted.
Okay.
Sorry, maybe they're not justified. Maybe it takes something like fake incubator babies, like the United States, before you destroy a country and kill millions of people. I mean, let's look at the same, the scales on balance.
Let's bring it. Okay. Let's bring in our guest in Pristina, Mr. Istrefi. I'd like to get your response to Mr. DeBar. Also, earlier you were talking about how far are world countries willing to go to show they're aligned or opposed with Russia. But what about Russia itself? It's stated its objectives. It's stated that it wants to see its operations in Ukraine till the end. How far is Russia willing to go here?
Well, I mean, let me just quickly comment on Mr. DeBar. I think it's really a misinterpretation that Mr. DeBar is doing, and I think it's just going back far into trying to draw analogies with other contexts, and I think that is really not useful at all. But I think, as I said in the beginning, it's Russia against the whole world. we are not talking about countries around the world. We are talking about multi-billion, multinational companies and cultural and sports associations and media and civil society and citizens that are condemning Russia. It's really a matter of Russia against everybody. And I think, it's difficult to kind of predict what Russia is going to do or is capable of doing. But I think one thing is clear, that Russia has failed itself right now, and Putin has failed Russia. It's already defeated because it's trying to do a war that cannot win.
Mr. DeBar, you'd like to answer? Yeah, you'd like to respond to that?
I would. As far as the UN goes, I should have addressed that before. I'm sorry. First of all, you have two, pulse takings at the United Nations. One was the Security Council on two different occasions, actually. One was whether or not to bring a resolution before the Security Council, and then was the vote on the resolution at the Security Council. And then second was the, basically symbolic or ceremonial vote at the General Assembly. The General Assembly, first of all, for people that don't know, has, I believe, 193 members now. I haven't looked in a couple of days. Each nation-state member of the General Assembly has one vote. The United States has one vote. China, which has about 20% or better of humanity's population, has one vote. Palau, which has 3 guys and a palm tree, has one vote. And across the landscape of nation-states, there are the European and North American colonial powers, basically. The old colonial powers, Spain, Britain, France, etc. And then the United States, which sort of succeeded to all of that after World War II, and their colonies in one block. And then the people who have fallen outside of it or escaped it to date in another. If you look at a map of the world against the vote in the General Assembly, the U.S., Europe, and their colonies voted one way, and the others voted the other. In terms of human population, I'll just mention 2 of the people that abstained at the General Assembly, because the vote against is meaningless. This is a symbolism. Both China and India abstained from the vote. That's about 3 billion people between the two of them in a population of 7 billion. All, by the way, of the BRICS countries, including Brazil, abstained, and South Africa. And South Africa is also continuing to none of these are going to honor U.S. sanctions against Russia, by the way. And there's some very important structures around the world, part of the Belt and Road Initiative, CELAC in the Western Hemisphere, and others, that want nothing to do with the United States position on this, that have friendly relations with Russia and with China, and are not going to be bullied. I would say Iran, Venezuela, and a number of other very important oil producers, for example, are among those. And what we're looking at, by the way, is the weakening and perhaps the demise of the dollar as the world's hard currency, as just one of the pieces of blowback of this overreach by the United States. So it's not the whole world versus Russia. The media here is trying to portray it that way, but about half the population of the world knows that that's not true, even if they don't know that in Pristina.
Mr. Istrefi, Washington, yeah, you can respond to that as well. Also, let me throw in this question. Washington has pledged a further $800 million in military assistance for Ukraine. I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well. Is this the level of support Ukraine was expecting from the U.S. and co? And also, if you'd like to respond to Mr. DeBar's comments as well, go ahead.
Sure. Even if symbolic, I think it's fundamental to understand that symbolism has been translated into 141 countries of the world, members of United Nations, condemning Russia. 35 among those who Mr. DeBar mentioned abstained. Even if symbolic, they could have well been on the side of Russia to vote against, as there were 5, including Russia. And honestly, I just feel that had Putin known that Bashar al-Assad is going to vote against, in opposition, or supporting Russia, I don't think he would have wanted that. And it's just, and North Korea. I think we have to understand just how firm is the entire world, without exaggerating, on Russian aggression in Ukraine, against Ukraine. The other thing, I don't think Ukraine expected the support that US or the other countries are providing. I think 100 million, 2 billion, 20 billion is not sufficient. If we are witnessing the devastation that is taking place in Ukraine and that children are being killed, murdered, indiscriminate fighting and shelling, I think Ukraine and Europe and NATO should do more, and I think they should respond clearly and firmly to the needs of Ukraine. And that should go beyond just financial and diplomatic support to Ukraine.
Mr. Istrefi, I want to stay with you for a second there. I'm sure you would agree that there's been a clear double standard and hypocrisy regarding reactions to this war. So many countries, as we know, have chimed in with sanctions and censuring Russia, but that has not been the case in so many of the other wars and conflicts and invasions that we've seen over the past 20 years. Why is that?
Well, I think every situation is unique. And I think it's really not very helpful in trying to compare situations like alike. It's too difficult, it's challenging. And it just goes into kind of trying to interpret the situations and identifying analogies that don't fit. So I think it's a unique situation now with Ukraine. It's the heart of Europe. It's against countries at the end of the day that don't want to be dealing with Russia or have anything to do with Russia, want to join EU and NATO. And it's not only Ukraine, it's Georgia, it's Armenia. There are other countries that are in the proximity of Russia, and if you will, in that borderline that sets the NATO expansion or not. But I think even Eastern European countries and the Western Balkan countries are looking forward to joining and be part of those values and aspirations that they want to. And the Russian invasion tells it that it wants to hold the country back against their will, against what their aspirations are. It's a matter of values, it's a matter of aspirations of the people of Ukraine.
Mr. DeBar, we're talking about the double standard reactions to this war. Mr. Istrefi says that it's kind of difficult to draw comparisons between these different situations. I think in the bigger picture, when we're talking about women and children being killed and occupations happening, like the one that's happening in occupied Palestine, there are hypocrisy and double standards in the reactions that we've been seeing. I'd like you to offer a rebuttal to what our guest in Pristina has said as well.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 6 kids. I grew up as the oldest of a household full of kids. That's the argument that one of them getting caught doing something that another one has done uses to not get in trouble. It has nothing to do with the actual offense. There's a question I'd like to ask him, though, and just put out for the audience in general, and it's based in history. In 1962, the Cuban government, which was installed by a popular revolution 2 years earlier, which was attacked by the United States militarily shortly after it had established itself, on behalf of corporations that were large landowners that wanted their estates back and their money. And the Cuban government asked the Soviet Union for military protection, some assistance. The Soviet Union installed some nuclear-tipped missiles in Cuba that were analogous to, as a matter of fact, missiles that the United States had installed in Turkey on the border of the Soviet Union a year earlier. And the United States demanded that they be removed and was prepared to conduct global thermonuclear war over that. Now, I'd like to know what it is exactly about the United States that is so special that its integrity, physical integrity, military security should be worthy of defending at arm's length like that with the threat of nuclear war, while Russia, facing the threat of nuclear war on its border in a slow roll, which is now placed at the apogee of Hitler's invasion. If the NATO were to attack now, they would be attacking, with the exception of Belarus, from the deepest that Hitler went in with Operation Barbarossa, and that's without firing a shot. What is it exactly that entitles the United States to so much space for protection, and Russia nothing?
Okay, so let's hear the answer from Mr. Istrefi before we wrap up the program. Mr. Istrefi, would you like to answer that question?
It's really a situation that was critical 60 years ago, or even the Second World War 50, 60 years ago. So I don't feel there is easy to draw any comparison between now and then. It's a different era. And I think it's not really helpful to try and do that. But let me tell you how Russia is perceived in the Western Balkans, in the region where I live. It's a country that produces fear and insecurity in the Western Balkans. And it's not United States, it's not European Union. And I think it's really not good to try and misplace or put emphasis on something that is not. I think we are seeing a situation where European Union, where most of the countries around the world are seeing this as a threat to their security. They are seeing a threat to their peace and freedom and to democracy. It's not only United States.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in there. That's all the time we have for tonight's show. Allow me to thank my guests, radio host, journalist, and political activist Don DeBar joining us from New York, and also the Balkan Forum Executive Director, Mr. Astrit Istrefi, joining us from Pristina. And also thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us on tonight's Spotlight. It's good night for now, and see you next time.